Welcome to Dad Reads Sci-Fi. Alpha Test. The Legacy of Heorot. Larry Niven, Jerry Pournelle, and Stephen Barnes. 1987. Chapter 1. Camelot. They do not preach that their God will rouse them, a little before the nuts work loose. Kipling, The Sons of Martha. "Cadsy, wait up!" Cadman Wayland chuckled to himself and dug his heels into the slope, slowing his descent. He politely busied himself, adjusting the rangefinder on his camera. After months on Avalon, he still found the shadows too sharp and the sunlight too blue. Subtle things, noticed only when he used familiar equipment, like the camera. The colony sprang into high relief, and the recorder in his backpack vibrated noiselessly to make a holotape recording of the network of buildings and plowed fields and animal pens that stretched out in the valley below. The colony was 10 kilometers farther on, but the electronically enhanced lenses brought its low buildings close enough to touch. The image jolted as Sylvia slid into him. She caught herself with a palm against his back. "Ouch, sorry." "Here." He handed her the camera. "See what we've built." She gratefully accepted the excuse to rest. Her short brown hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her freckled cheeks were flushed. 6 miles, downhill, and Sylvia was tiring. In the last hour she'd found a dozen reasons to stop. Stones in her walking shoes, burrs inside her blouse. Cadman chuckled inwardly. The colony's biologist was tough, and as stubborn about admitting fatigue as he. She's also 3 months pregnant. Won't admit there are real differences between the sexes. So be it. Ernst loped down the slope. A brace of the large silver fish-like creatures the colony had dubbed Samlin slapped against his muscular back. His grin split his broad face from ear to jug ear. "Tiring out, Sylvia? You ought to work out. Exercise. I can show you." Sylvia laughed. "Not right now. Thanks, Ernst. Later." Poor bastard. Ernst Cohen had been the solar system's leading authority on reproductive biology and brighter than hell. You could watch it at cocktail parties. Everyone else talking, and suddenly Ernst would say maybe 2 sentences, and half the room would go silent as the rest of them digested the implications. That was 10 light years ago. Ernst had come out of frozen sleep with the mind of a child. Sylvia scanned the valley, gave a sigh of pleasure. "Terrific shot, isn't it?" Cadman's voice, ordinarily a hoarse rumbling sound, was quietly thoughtful. "National Geographic will love it." He squatted next to her. "Are you all right?" "Just fine," she murmured. She turned, warming him with her smile. "But I'll be happy to get back home." She was almost 20 years younger than he. Sylvia was all quick wit and golden eyes that glowed with life above a galaxy of freckles. Her pregnancy changed nothing. It was wonderful. It was frustrating. Being with her made him forget the years and the aches. It's the eyes. She's plain except for the eyes. God help me. The pass they traversed was at the base of the tallest mountain on the island. The highest of its double peaks was just above 3,200 meters. Both were shrouded with mist. The delicate bat shapes of the pterodons glided in and out of the cloud cover with barely a flutter of their membranous wings. Ernst stared up at them, his face a mask of puzzled concentration. What would Dr. Ernst Cohen have made of them? They aren't really pterodons. There are other oddities. He'd have loved it here. "They woke him twice," Sylvia said. "Maybe if they'd just left him cold." "We did need him." "We did," Cadman said. "But Ernst wasn't crew. He could have slept through. But they had a problem with one bank of frozen embryos and woke him, and he'd solved that. And they chilled him again. And then there was another problem. And as good as man has ever lived follows me around to carry sample. Son of a bitch." A square kilometer of plastic-coated solar cells glittered silver on the hills above the colony. Today's sunshine meant independence from the efficient power plants of the landers. An actual fusion plant would be constructed within the next 4 months. Then the colony would be fully established, and the spread of man across the face of Tau Ceti 4 could really begin. Across Camelot, anyway. 80 kilometers of stormy ocean separated the island from the mainland. A New Guinea-sized island was quite ambitious enough for humankind's first interstellar colony. Zack had known what he was doing. Isolate the problems. So where were the problems? Snow up there, Cadman said, shading his eyes as he gazed up into the eternal clouds at the tops. Skis. We didn't bring skis. We have plastics. Carlos can make me a pair of skis. Sylvia handed him back his camera, voice carefully neutral. She said, "You don't have to go to the continent, Cadman. There's plenty for you to do around the camp. Nothing that any other able body couldn't do. You're not a geologist. You'd be doing grunt work anyway." She looked down at him, sighed in exasperation, and gave him her hand for balance as he stood. "Do you just want to go hunting dinosaurs?" "Sure. What boy doesn't want to brag a brontosaurus?" He slipped the camera back into its holster at his side. "Sometimes I wish we'd brought fetuses for a Kodiak, or a few mountain lions." He was smiling as he said it, but Sylvia wondered. Cadman brushed his hand through thick black hair. There was no gray in it, but his face was sun-cured leather. His body was as young as a daily hour of intensive exercise could make it. He could remember when he hadn't needed regular exercise to maintain the natural tone. Now, at the adjusted age of 42, he was seriously considering nudging that up to an hour and a half. "I'm slowing down," he thought. "She's carrying another man's baby, and I'd rather be with her than Marianne Eisenhower." He thought of 4 or 5 women who had made their intentions clear. Phyllis McAndrews, Jean Patterson, Willie Blonde agronomist, rumored to give the best massage on the planet. He just wasn't interested. Time wounds all heals. The glands must be drying up. Sylvia grinned back. Only real gentlemen refuse to notice when the lady is slowing them down. Ernst stood carefully out of earshot. His intelligence was gone, but not his manners. She jerked her thumb at the pair of freshly caught silver and black torpedo shapes hanging over Ernst's back. 15 and 20 pounds at a guess. One still gaped. The gills still fluttered, too far back on its body. They didn't look that much like earthly salmon, but no other creature of earth fit either. "Tell you what, I'll fix dinner tonight. Everybody to the beach for a salmon roast." She linked her arm with Cadman's as they marched down the side of the hill. He grinned maliciously. "Are you sure Terry won't mind that?" "Oh, come now. I'm just a poor pregnant lady biologist who appreciates the presence of a strong man, and Terry's known you for years. I may not be as safe as you think." She snorted. "Fat chance. When I'm sure you want my body and not my mind, I'll faint." He looked at her appraisingly. "Which way will you fall?" "Hush." They laughed. The sun shone more brightly than usual. "Golden fields, silver rivers." Cadman laughed. "I suppose I see a year-round water supply and fertile croplands." "You would. Somebody had better." The stream flowed past the camp and over the bluff above Miskatonic River, the greatest body of running water on the island. 8 kilometers to the south, the grasslands ended in a burnt, blackened semicircle of firebreak, and beyond that the crest of giant brambles began. The colonists had chosen a beautiful space to start a new world, lovely enough to make him feel almost at peace. Times like this confused him. It was a fight not to shut down his thoughts and find some project totally involving and preferably a little risky. Slender fingers dug into his arm. "Hey, big guy, don't go brooding on me. This was supposed to be our walk day. Stay with me for a while." "Hmm?" He was still quiet. Tau Ceti 4. Avalon. She rolled the words over her tongue. "It's a good name, but don't know. Not poetic enough?" He helped her over a rock. It took effort to focus on the game she was inviting him to play. "I've read poetry." Kipling, she laughed. It's all right. I know you're better read than me, and I'll keep your secret. I don't know. Avalon's all right, but there are others. Beautiful, exciting places from history, or legend. Shangri-La, Babylon, Xanadu. Sure. Pelennor? He shook his head. You must mean Pellucidar. Pelennor was a king, one of Arthur's knights of the Round Table. Well, maybe so, but I don't mean Pellucidar either. There aren't really any predators on the island. Except for the turkeys and other critters we've seeded. There just isn't a damn thing bigger than an insect. Even the plant life, low grass and thorn trees, it's like a blank slate. Or a park. Cadman, he asked, does that bother you? Well, the worst thing we can do is mess up one island. It isn't like we turned all those earth creatures loose on the mainland. I meant too perfect. Why do you care? Well, Ernst ran up, pointing. Birds! Big birds! Two of the fan-winged shapes swooped past. Cadman watched as they circled out over the plain, then vanished in the mist that reached halfway down the face of the mucking great mountain. Nest there? Ernst asked. Why there? He frowned again. See, we do have company. The pterodons? They're way more frightened of us than we are of them, and the biggest of them is hardly strong enough to carry off a good-sized salmon, let alone a sheep. How about a baby? He asked. She took it seriously. I don't think so. To tell you the truth, I haven't seen anything much bigger than a seagull, and that bothers me. The ecology is just too damn simple. Take out the pterodons, and all you've got is small insects and these big local fish. The salmon. Of course, they aren't really fish. What with the trout and the catfish and the turkeys, we've added more animals than we've found. Spooky. Sylvia turned thoughtful as they picked their way down the steep slope. You know, there's something funny about the pterodons. What's that? Well, remember the one we saw hunting salmon in the pool? Sure. Reminded me of albatross in the South Pacific. Sailing aboard Ariadne with a fair wind north. A million years, no, not a million years, but a lot more than 1,000,000 miles ago. With luck, we'll build schooners here before I'm dead. Didn't that look funny to you? I can't quite put my finger on it, but it reminded me of an old Walt Disney nature film, where the action run in reverse to be comical. Reverse? A bird hits the water, hard and fast, makes its grab, then takes off at its leisure. That bird hit the water slow and took off fast, almost as if... She frowned, shaking her head like someone trying to rattle cobwebs off a thought. Never mind. I'm trying to force something. Or see something that isn't there. You'd love to put some mystery into this system. How'd you get to know me so well? I always understand other men's women. Without warning, Cadman began to run, pulling Sylvia down the last 20 meters of slope. She skidded on her heels to slow herself, nonplussed but exhilarated by a sudden burst of energy. He glanced back and realized that Ernst was running too. Ernst looked frightened. Hold up, Cadman said. He called Ernst. It's okay, Ernst. We're just running for fun. Want a race? Ernst's brow cleared. His run slowed. Race? Sure, Cadman. Start even? They lined up, gave Sylvia 100 meters of head start, and ran. Even this far out from the camp, there was a blackened strip of road for them to follow. It was brittle and glassy. Your road, Ernst shouted. Yours. Sure, it was. The last time they really needed me. Ernst led with the weed burner, a converted military flamethrower. Cadman had driven the bulldozer, wishing all along that there had been enough fuel to use a landing craft. That would have made a road. Hover across the ground on the Minerva, fuse the rock forever. Even so, he felt pride when he scanned the kilometers of dark ribbon he had created with his own sweat and skill. He bent to look closer at the surface of the road. A few tiny bluish sprigs were nosing their way out of the ground. Sylvia came up puffing. Maybe we should sow the ground with salt before you make your next pass. I'm not even sure it matters. Not much of the heavy machinery comes out this far. Thin clouds of dust, raised by the tractors, puffed like tiny fires in the distant fields. The crops had been established. Now they must be extended. Prepare the ground for new crop tests. Lay away grain and seeds against the possibility of a bad year. The colony was a success. Zach Moskowitz, administrator, all-around good guy. Everybody loved Zach. Zach had done it. The colony was a success, and nothing short of a disaster could stop its expansion across the island and eventually over all of Tau Ceti 4. Agriculture, food, vitamins, some comforts. We have those, and now comes prospecting. Iron ore had been discovered on the island itself, and the orbiting laboratory had found what looked very much like a deposit of pitchblende. It was deep in the interior of the continent, across thousands of kilometers of ocean and through badlands, but it was there. Iron and uranium, the foundations of empire, the sons of Martha. Eh? Sylvia giggled. Kipling, sorry. Politicians are the sons of Mary. Then there are the others, the ones who keep civilization going. They do not preach that their God will rouse them a little before the nuts look loose. Oh, never mind. Today seemed more tolerable, more like the first days when Cadman and Sylvia and the other first ones thundered down from the heavens in their winged landing craft. All the gliding characteristics of a brick. We left a line of fire and thunder that circled the sky. 150 colonists waited in orbit, cold as corpses and no more active, while we scanned a strange planet from end to end and chose the place to set our city and set our foot in the rock of this world. The National Geographic Society's probes told a lot. Tau Ceti 4 had oxygen and water and nitrogen. The planet was cooler than Earth, so the temperate zones were smaller, but a lot of the planet was livable. They'd known there would be plants, and guessed at animals. Humans could live there. Or could they? Probably, but the only certainty would come when people tried it. Civilization on Earth was rich, comfortable, satisfying, and crowded and dull. 40 million university graduates had volunteered for the expedition. The first Winnowing had eliminated compulsive volunteers, flakes whose horoscopes had told them to find a different sky, candidates with allergies or other handicaps, geniuses who couldn't tolerate cramped conditions or human company, or people who gave orders. Perhaps 100,000 had been seriously considered, and 200 had set forth to conquer Tau Ceti 4. 8 had died along the way. No world would ever be tamed by robots. It took men crossing space, some awake, some chilled, 100 years across space. The early days were good. We were comrades in an untamed land, and we found paradise, and they don't need me at all. They need Sylvia. They need the engineers and the tractor drivers, and God help us, the administrators and bean counters, but never a soldier. Sheep and calves roamed the pastures now. Colts grazed. Soon the camp would be full of children, alive with their happy wet smells and sounds. And what had they need for those? For Colonel Cadman Wayland, United Nations Peacekeeping Force, retired. Animals. A distant lowing snapped Cadman out of his reverie. They were nearing the rows of moist, furrowed earth. Other crews had burnt the ground, spitting jellied fuel from backpack flamethrowers to clear the soil of underbrush without glazing it into slag. The charred dirt had long since been plowed under to prepare for seeding. The ground was very fertile, needing only minor nitrate supplementation to provide a healthy medium for the crops. In the distance, one of the farmers slowed his tractor to wave to them, and Ernst lifted 2 salmon in triumphant greeting. Further ahead, Cadman knew that there were colts and calves, still far too young to manage the plows that would be fashioned for them. It was an unusual combination, a meld of high technology and muscle-intensive agriculture. In an emergency, the colony could fall back on the most ancient and reliable means of production. There were rows of wheat and spinach and soybeans, and in the mist-filtered glare of Tau Ceti, Their leaves and stalks glistened healthily. At the base of the rows ran the irrigation ditches, fed by the stream that passed under the low bridge just ahead, flowing past the camp and over the edge of the bluff to join the Miskatonic River. The sounds of the main camp drifted to them, the hum of light machinery, the crackle of laughter, and the whining burr of saws and lathes working wood and metal. The animal pens were on the outskirts of the main camp. Dogs and pigs had their own pens, the horses a well-fenced running space. The chickens were cooped near the machine shop, closer into the main compound. Cadman stopped to examine the wire surrounding the pens. His face tautened into a frown. Their hot wire wasn't even warm. The power had been switched off months before. The barbed wire beyond that was down in 3 places that he could see. He scraped at a brownish patch of rust with his thumbnail. "Let it go," Sylvia chided. "Look at this." His voice was flat with disgust. "The strands are slack and the power line is broken. Doesn't anybody give a damn anymore? We haven't been here long enough to get this lazy." "Cad!" Sylvia's pale, slender fingers covered his, prying them away from the strand. She gripped his hand tightly. "Look, I know I keep getting outvoted, and I can live with that." He was mortified to hear the petulance creeping into his voice, to see the maternal concern softening her eyes. "Listen, you keep telling me that there are things about this island that bother you. We've only got one shot at this. Nobody's going home, and no one's sending any reinforcements. It only makes sense to be a little paranoid. That's why we picked an island, isn't it? To localize the dangers?" She squeezed his arm. "I can't change your mind, so I'll try not to. Listen, why make a big thing about it? Why not just fix the fence yourself?" "Sounds good." "Good. I'll send for you when we're ready for the barbecue." Just before they took the last turn into town, Cadman looked back at the farmers and felt a brief pang of jealousy. They, in wresting victory from the soil, were the true hunters, the true warriors. Ultimately, their efforts would determine the future of the fledgling community. The sun was warm, but far warmer was Sylvia's hand against his arm. The community had grown in a strangely organic manner. The first crew members to build their individual prefab huts had built them close together within the defensive perimeter. Perimeters, 3 rings, electric fence, minefield, barbed wire. It made sense at the time. Cadman's folly. "And one of these days they'll make me go dig up the mines. No enemies, no dangers, nothing. And all that fucking work to build fences." Most of the colonists had only been awake for 8 months, and already they were beginning to get sloppy. As they had been awakened and shuttled down, the camp expanded, filling the defensive compound, then spreading outside it. From above, the colony looked like a spiral nebula, or a conch shell sliced sideways. Cadman's home was at the center. The colonists outside the fence had more room, larger lots, but their location showed their status. Colonists. They were not among the first ones. Everyone on Avalon was equal, but some were more equal than others. The first ones had landed 4 months earlier and had social status. At least those who hadn't wasted time and effort building needless fences and minefields had status. The muffled whir of a power saw grew louder, and the dry smell of sawdust grew more distinct, as Cadman wove his way through the narrow streets that divided off the flat-roofed houses and foam-sprayed pre-structured domes. Some of the domes had been left in their original tan. Others were painted, some with a kaleidoscope of colors. Here and there were strikingly realistic murals. We have a lot of talent here, all kinds. Speaking of which, the saw changed pitch as Carlos Martinez spotted Cadman and lifted a hand in greeting. Carlos' dark, lean body glistened with perspiration as he glided the saw over the planks. The thorn trees at the perimeter of the clearing provided a generous supply of wood, but it was knotty and coarsely grained. Only a master craftsman like Carlos could have made anything but firewood of it, and the carpenter was deliciously aware of his valued position. Half the colony's dwellings had a table or bed framed by Carlos. It was doubtful that he would ever have to take his rotation in the field to earn his share of the crop. "Cadman, mi amigo." Carlos wiped his brow and extended a sweaty palm that Cadman shook firmly. Carlos was a true mongrel and gloried in it. Originally from Argentina, his bloodline was predominantly black. His cultural leanings, anyone's guess. His Spanish was atrocious, but he interjected it into his conversation regardless. "I heard that you had gone off with the lovely Senorita Faulkner." "Senora," Cadman corrected. He moved in for a closer look at the woodwork on the bench. It was the beginnings of a headboard for Carlos' bed, and already penciled on it were mermaids cavorting in improbable couplings with virile mermen and grinning sailors. He sighed. "Senora," Carlos smiled mischievously, "it's true that sometimes I forget. It'll get easier to remember." He patted his stomach. "She's got a passenger on board now." Carlos raised his eyebrows in lecherous speculation. "She is taking on good flesh, no?" "My people, we appreciate," he screwed up his mouth in a dramatic search for the right word, "a substantial woman." Substantial. "See, a helpmate in the fields, a comfort by the fireside. Ah, the days of old." "Cut the crap," Cadman said without heat. "Your family never got closer to the fields than the handle of a whip. They've had silk on their backs and diplomas in their pockets for 6 generations, at least." He turned and worked the latch of his phone frame igloo. Behind him, Carlos sighed. "With men like you, who can wonder that romance is dying in the world?" The rest of his monologue was drowned out as the saw revved up again. Cadman groped out to find the curtain cord and drew it to let in a spray of sunshine. It might be a month before Tau Ceti 4 saw such a bright day again, and he was loath to waste it. The sun was already low in the sky. Preparations for the barbecue would begin when twilight fell. The colonists who were working the day shift would put aside their farming and building and repair work and gather on the beach for good food and good fellowship. He wanted to grab his toolbox and go out to the fence, but his solitary bed, nestled beneath a sheltering bough of drip-dried underwear, called to him in a voice that his suddenly heavy muscles couldn't ignore. "I'll just sit for a moment," he told himself. The water mattress sloshed pleasantly under his buttocks as he settled his weight into it. He rarely noticed until he was tired, but Avalon's gravity put an extra 10 pounds on him every second of his life. The waning sunlight cast deep shadows in the room, here and there glinting on the shelves and boxes that held the last remnants of another life. Everything he had been was in this room. The 160 people who made up the crew and passengers of the Geographic were his only family and friends. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough, because the behaviorists and sociologists and colony planners said it was enough. Because they, in their infinite wisdom, had calculated exactly how many pressed flower petals and class album video discs were required to stave off depression. Just enough to stimulate the fond memories, not enough to create an incurable homesickness. His world, the silver gilt college trophies, reminders of victories in debate and track and wrestling, were holograms. Hologram images of smiling women whose warm lips and smooth bodies left frustratingly little impression on his memory. How long had they been dead? 30 years? 40? They'd been planning another colony even before Geographic launched. A statuesque New Yorker named Heidi had talked about writing the next starship to build a colony at Epsilon, Eridani. Maybe she had. It would have launched 20 years after Geographic. She might even now be wondering which of her old beaux was still alive. There were discs of favorite movies, his personal collection, though in principle they were part of a camp library. There, a shifting hologram of his command post in Central Africa. A peacekeeping force, nothing more until the revolutions. "Sergeant Major Mavubi, we're moving out, sir." We were needed then. His clothing was all non-synthetics that might take a generation to replace. How long would it be until they thawed out the silkworms and the mulberry bushes for them to feed on? Not exactly a high-priority item. He didn't remember closing his eyes. He was lying down, and the sun had set. Cadman grabbed his toolbox and a folding stool and hustled from the room. Getting old is one thing, damn it. Senility will just have to wait.